Well, it works this
Hey.
afternoon. It decided to give me permission today. Once again, maybe we're on a really
Yay.
good streak. I mean, it's a good way to end 2025, which is weird to think that we're at the end of, I feel like 2025 just started.
I know,
Like
right? And I
it,
keep thinking to 2026, and so I'm like, okay, 2026 is ending, but that's very not right.
it kind of hurts a little bit.
Yes.
I'm not gonna lie, but well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to living in the Texas Hill Country. Like we've already said, this is gonna be our last episode for 2025. So we won't see y'all till
I think we said
January
January 6th.
6th, 7th, 6th,
Yeah, 6th.
first Tuesday in January. We will be back. But today we have Tiffany Dowell Lashmet with us. Tiffany, you want to give us a little introduction, introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, for sure. Sounds great. Well, thank you guys for having me on the show. My name's Tiffany Dowell Lashmet. I'm an extension agricultural law specialist with Texas A&M. So basically, I travel around the state of Texas educating landowners and ag producers about legal issues that might affect them. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of those. So everything from, water law, fence law, property taxes, eminent domain, landowner liability, leases. So I do that in a variety of different ways. Like I said, I do a lot of in-person programs. I have a blog and a podcast, just trying to create resources to help rural landowners and ag producers.
Well, and you're the only one you are one of a kind in the state of Texas.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. I'm a one-man show. So it's a little crazy. I have a friend who's got the same job in Maryland, and it takes him 2 hours to get across the state. 2 hours doesn't get me out of the panhandle. You know
I
what I
was gonna
mean?
say that's so cute. It takes 2 hours to get across the state. Well, and the thing up there is it's really you don't go that far. It's just the speed limits up there are so if they did it by Texas speed limits, I think you could probably get across the state in about half the time.
Probably right. That's probably right. Yeah, yeah. But I do. I cover the whole state of Texas, and it's a great gig. I really love it.
So your background is so you went to law school, you did all the things you could technically practice as law, but you've decided to, I'll say, go the educating people, helping people out.
Yeah, that's right. So I went to law school at the University of New Mexico. Came out of law school and practiced at a firm doing civil litigation for about 4 years. And probably would have stayed there. I was very happy at that firm, and I had great coworkers, and we worked on great cases. But then this job posting came across my desk, and for somebody who is interested in ag and likes things like public speaking and stuff like that, it was a great opportunity to get to kind of meld all my interests together in one thing. And so I applied. I've been here now for, gosh, 13 years.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So not planning to go anywhere anytime soon.
No, I get asked that sometimes. Law students, I talk to a lot of law students that or potential law students who will say, well, oh my gosh, I think I want a job like yours. What do I do? And I usually tell them, I think I'm going to have to get hit by a bus for that to
Yeah.
happen. But yeah, no, I'm very happy where I am.
Yeah, because I think in the past you said you had a friend in Maryland that does a similar position. I think maybe you said I feel like I've talked to
Oklahoma.
you before. Oklahoma has another, but really outside of that, like there's maybe one or two other states that
Yeah, there's
has a
really only
similar.
about 5 or 6 of us in the whole country. So it's
Oh,
pretty
wow.
limited. New Mexico recently added somebody. There's a couple in the Midwest, but it's a pretty limited number of us that do this kind of work.
So I guess so we're going to talk, I believe we're talking about trespassing today.
Yeah.
So is what we are talking about,
Okay.
which something that, whether it's intentional or not, everyone is probably I think you could probably say everyone has probably accidentally trespassed and not known it at some point in time in their life.
Yeah, that's probably true, right? And trespass is interesting because there's different types of trespass. There's criminal trespass and there's civil trespass. Another thing that'll surprise people sometimes is it doesn't have to be a person trespassing. It could be a thing. And so we see those kind of cases come up all kind of in the ag realm.
So I guess we'll start off with you said there was criminal trespass and
Civil trespass.
civil trespass. So let's start with there, what the differences are, what each of them are, differences, all that kind
Sure.
of stuff.
Yeah, so they're really pretty similar. In the law, there's sort of criminal law and then there's civil law, right? So criminal law is what you think of on like Law and Order, right? So the state of Texas versus the defendant in a case, right? Typically, there are fines or penalties that can go with that. Uh, Generally speaking, trespass is usually a misdemeanor if that's the only charge. And so you're looking usually at a fine, could potentially be a short amount of time in jail. Typically, it's fines that come into play. That's criminal. Civil is not the state of Texas, no criminal penalties, but it's usually just one person suing another person, typically for monetary damages. Okay. And so you might have one instance of trespass that can result in both types of cases, right? If the state decides to prosecute and the landowner were to decide to file a civil lawsuit, could have both, could have one or the other. Really, there's only one kind of difference in how they are proven, right? Or the elements that you need. For both criminal and civil trespass, what you have to prove is that there was a person or thing who entered onto the land of another without permission. Pretty straightforward, right? For criminal trespass, there's an added element, and you have to prove that that person, the trespasser, did not or knew they were not allowed to be there, right? So there's this one added element. And so that's why we see things like purple paint on the fence posts or the trees, or we see no trespassing signs because of that extra element of criminal trespass. And we can go into detail on that in just a second. But that's really the difference, right? So if somebody enters property without permission, then we can have them that proceed one or both of those ways.
Okay, so, and generally speaking, and obviously correct me if I'm very wrong on this, is in all trespassing cases, it will always be criminal, but there are some cases where it's criminal and civil, but you'll never have a case of where it's just civil trespass.
No, you
Correct?
could have you could have just criminal, you could have
Okay.
just civil, or you could have both. Yeah.
Okay.
And it just depends on if the district attorney or county attorney decides to prosecute or not, and
Okay.
whether or not that landowner decides to file a case or not. So it's really kind of discretionary up to both
Okay.
the state to make that decision and the landowner.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I guess let's dive into, you talked about that, obviously when we think of trespassing, we think of like people,
Mhm.
but you had
Mhm.
mentioned that objects can quote unquote trespass. So what do you mean by objects?
That's right. So there's a couple of different examples I can give you kind of in the rural living context. One place we have sometimes seen trespass cases is when you've got an issue with herbicide drift. Again, probably not something that you're going to think about, right? But let's say there was a case where I think it was the state or the county or somebody was spraying a right of way, and the herbicide that they sprayed on the right of way drifted in and damaged the neighbor's cotton fields. One of the claims they decided to bring was trespass because those molecules of the herbicide entered their property without permission and caused damage. So there's an example. Another place we sometimes see trespass claims or the threat of trespass claims are with drones flying, right? So if you've got a drone that flies over someone's property, this gets us into a whole different discussion.
A whole other can of worms.
Multiple cans of worms we're opening here. Depending on the height of the drone, right, there could potentially be a trespass claim made there. So those are just a couple of examples of where you can see this come up.
And see, the one that I always think of is, so I'm a hunter. Like projectiles, firearms, making sure that your bullet does not cross lines, or a bolt or a bow an
Sure.
arrow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I think. I never thought of herbicide, but it makes that makes perfect sense, to be honest.
Yeah. So those can kind of come up. Like I say, they're not as common as the person trespassing, but I think if we're going to talk holistically about trespass, it's an important item to include.
I was gonna say, okay, now I'm curious, like, what is I hate to say the weirdest, but like that you've heard of, like one of the like kind of, I'll say the craziest trespass where it's an object. And you can think about it. Like,
So-
I just randomly was like, I wonder what the weirdest one that you've ever heard of.
No, I do have one. It was kind of an object. It wasn't a person. It was monkeys.
Oh,
Yeah. So I get this phone call, and the guy says, my neighbor's monkeys keep getting onto my land and eating the corn in my deer feeder. So the neighbor told me I need to move the feeders further away so the monkeys won't go there, but I don't know how far that is.
Do you have to like check your watch and like, what time is it? Can
Well,
I?
I initially I thought I was being punked. Like I thought my friends
Right.
were playing a joke on me. It was an actual call. And then I thought like, wow, I'm really glad I went to law school for things like this, right?
Right.
So I just had to tell him like, I don't know how far to move your deer feeder away, but the monkeys were trespassing on that guy's property.
That's
So,
funny.
okay, so animals can qualify, like somebody's pet or livestock could 100% be trespassing.
Yeah, I would say those cases aren't super common that
Right.
trespass is a claim that gets brought, but it's certainly a claim that's available that people could bring in that situation.
Hmm.
Yes.
I feel like you need to start a book. Like if you have not already started a book, you need to have like a book of like weird cases I've heard of. Because I mean, in Texas, monkeys are not as bad as it sounds. It's not completely crazy.
Right, right. I mean, this guy, like I said, I really thought I was being punked, and I was like, well, no, this is an actual caller. So, yeah, yeah.
Oh gosh, did you ask like what kind? Like were they like chimpanzees or like do you know what type of?
No, I didn't get into the weeds on the monkeys. I was just basically like, I don't know, I can't really help you. Right? Like,
Sorry.
not a monkey expert. I don't know.
Not a primate expert. I'm gonna
That's
let
right.
you can call a zoo maybe, and maybe they can tell you how far away to move.
Right. Or, Texas Parks and Wildlife. Like, I'm not sure that they deal with monkeys, but maybe. I don't know. So,
I think there is a
Okay, at least
population.
he sought out help for it because
yeah, I mean, I was impressed that this person like thought, who could
actually
probably help
help.
me with like a weird, crazy question?
Yeah.
Extension. Like, let's go to
Yeah.
extension. I mean, that's what we're here for. So,
That's sometimes I appreciate strange calls like that because I'm like, well, at least they called.
exactly right. They're trying. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think a Google search would
No.
get you get you very
Well, then
far.
you can chat GPT that one.
Right? That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, now that we dove down our rabbit hole, because Tiffany's been on Cup Chat before, she knows how
Yeah.
rabbit holes go. It's fine. It makes for entertaining chit chat. Okay, so with an actual person trespassing.
Mhm.
So I guess trying to think of where I mean I realize there's like a lot of avenues that we could go down. Is there a good place to start with talking about like people trespassing?
Yeah, so I mean, a question I get a lot is if I'm a landowner and I want to make sure that I'm as protected as I can be from a trespasser situation, what should I know or what should I do? So I think a couple of things there. Like I said, if you're interested or if you want the ability for someone to be prosecuted for criminal trespass, again, you as a landowner can't control that, right? The state makes that decision. But if you want that to be an option for the state, you do need to have something posted, right? Or some way to let people know they're not allowed to be on the property.
Mhm.
In the Texas Penal Code, there's 5 different ways you can do that. So I always encourage landowners, I think it's smart to do one of these. That way, if there is an issue, criminal charges are at least on the table, should that be what the state decides to do. 5 options. The first one, you can tell somebody that they're not allowed to be there. Of course, the lawyer and me want you to do that in writing, right? So we can prove it. So tell them is one option. You can hang no trespassing signs. That's another option. You can do the purple paint. So you'll sometimes see purple paint in Texas on fence posts or tree trunks. You need to look at the statute. There's rules about it, right? It has to be like 5 to 8 feet high. It has to be, I think, an inch wide and I think a foot long, something like that. Anyway, look up the rules. But purple paint means no trespass. If you are growing a crop that's for human consumption, that's under cultivation or harvest, that alone means no trespass. So if you were growing a field of sweet corn, for example, that means no trespassing, right?
No
Just by that crop
signs, no
being there.
paint, no
That's right.
fences. It is
Doesn't matter.
automatic.
Yes.
Do not cross.
That's right. And then the last one is if you've got your property completely fenced so as to keep people out or keep animals in, that fencing means no trespassing. So like if you see a no trespassing sign on a fence, that's kind of like belt and suspenders, right? But from a legal perspective, I always encourage folks, I would sure think about one of those options. Again, like I say, hopefully it never comes up. Hopefully you never need it. But I'd make sure I had one of those boxes checked, especially if I was concerned about trespassing.
And when it comes to the signs, like it literally does not have to be anything fancy. There's no specifications. You can go buy it from Walmart. You can make your own. It has to say the words no trespassing.
No trespassing. That's right. Yep,
Okay.
exactly.
And then with the fences. So obviously, ideally, especially if you're running livestock or anything like that, you want a good solid fence.
Mhm.
Does fencing condition affect, like if you have like a fence, you have a section that's down, it's a little bit, could use a little TLC, little dilapidated. Does that still qualify as a fence?
So the statute, I've never seen a case where that was the issue. So I'm going to be guessing a little
Okay.
bit, right? I can't point you to a court decision that says that. What the statute says is it's got to be a fence that's designed to keep people out. So I think it depends on the facts, right? If it's literally like there's a big chunk that has fallen down and you can walk right over it, we might have a
Probably
problem,
not.
right? If we're just talking like, oh man, there's one wire that's broke, there's 4 other wires that are still there, I'm probably less concerned, right? So that gets pretty fact specific.
Okay. Okay. So ideally, if you have questions, just go fix your fence. Just fix
Yeah,
your
well,
fence.
probably a good policy just in general. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The other point that I think is important to hit on that gets overlooked is I think it's important for folks to be aware of their potential liability to trespassers on their property if they get injured. So this is something we talk a lot about in our landowner liability class. And I'll give you just a quick rundown. So generally speaking, a landowner is not liable for injuries to trespassers on their property, so long as they don't act with intent or with gross negligence. So gross negligence has to be something really, really egregious. Has to show a conscious disregard for human life, right? Almost like a knowing action. Hard for somebody who gets injured on the property to prove that most of the time, right? If you've just got a trespasser out there and they fall in a hole or something like that, you're not liable, right? Where I always want to warn people when we're talking about trespassers is if you do, as the landowner, cross that line and your action becomes intentional or grossly negligent and an injury occurs, you can be liable for that. So we've seen cases where, there was some trespassers on a ranch in South Texas, and the ranch foreman starts chasing them in his vehicle. We've got 2 vehicles, trespasser vehicle flips and rolls, and people die. Lawsuit came up, right? And the question was that ranch manager acting intentionally or with gross negligence? In that case, because of certain facts, it ended up that they weren't liable. But that's always something to be aware of, right? So I also get the question sometimes, right? Like, well, can you shoot a trespasser? My response is always, I'm not a criminal lawyer. Don't call me from jail, right?
Yeah.
You can look up the rules about things like self-defense, but I just think it's important for folks to know if you cross that line into intent or gross negligence, there's a potential for liability for the landowner if an injury were to occur.
So generally with that intent or gross negligence, it's at that point, you are making some sort of a decision to do something. Generally, I was trying to think if there'd be anything that you could, I hate to say put on your property, but anything that you could put on your property to actually like, I'm sure you could intentionally hurt people. There are
Yeah,
probably.
well, I'll give you an example. I get this question sometimes too. I had people say like, we need to have booby traps. What if we had booby traps set up
Okay.
to stop them from getting on the property? No booby traps. Okay.
Oh, that's a good, yeah.
That would be an example of
Okay.
something that I think could cross into intent or gross negligence fairly easily.
Okay. But then having, say, like a foothold trap of some site for animals and someone's dog gets on the property and they step on it, your intent was not to catch said animal or person. It was the intent to catch wildlife. It's just because you were trespassing, you didn't know it was there.
Right. I think now we would look at the facts,
And that would,
right?
that
Because
could
if
also
we-
get into a gray area of people saying, well, I wasn't meant to.
That's right. And that's where we got to be a little bit careful, right? And I always think about what we're saying in town, think about what we're posting online, right? So absent some facts that made it look like there was intent to harm, domestic animals or intent to harm a person on the property, something like that. Absent that, I think probably not liable there, right?
Okay. Okay. So, oh gosh, I'm trying to think. Carly, help me out here. I feel like my brain is going at like 6 million different directions. I'm like, what's the best direction to go next?
I have like 1,000 questions. I don't know which direction either. You've also answered a lot of them already that I had. What I guess, sorry.
You're good. You're good.
So I guess so we talked about, people actually like, I'll say accidentally getting on your property, which what if they intentionally know that they are trespassing on your property?
Yeah, so again, this is where it kind of comes into play on what some decisions that have to be made, right? So the first decision from a criminal perspective is that the state has to decide if they want to pursue that, right? I'm not a district attorney. I would guess though, if you had proof of somebody like intentionally trespassing, I would feel more likely to pursue that than some sort of accidental trespass situation, right? Or if you had somebody who was repeatedly trespassing after they knew they weren't supposed to, again, I would guess more likely to see that pursued from a criminal perspective. From a landowner perspective, again, that landowner gets to decide if they want to sue. Generally speaking, you only see those lawsuits when there's actual damages, right? If you're going to go through the expense and the hassle of a trial, generally there's monetary damages that you're seeking. And again, people can make all different decisions, but from my perspective, I would sure think if we had an intentional or a repeat issue, I would think just from a common sense perspective, probably more likely to see even a civil lawsuit be filed.
And so for somebody that, how do I word it? If they have the intent of trespassing, obviously, destroying property, cutting a fence, cutting a lock, whatever, that would be pretty easy, straightforward. They have the intent of, there's a barrier there and I am crossing said barrier. I'm assuming the intent would be also if there's a fence there, if there's signage, that would also mean that they don't necessarily have to damage anything, but they see the physical barrier, they see the sign, and they're still disregarding it.
Right. And I think in general, that would kind of point in that direction. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So what if somebody finds themselves, I'll say in the realm of, from the perspective of somebody that accidentally trespasses, like what are some recommendations if you find yourself in a scenario where you are the trespasser, what is a good course of action to keep yourself from getting in trouble from a landowner?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I think a couple of things, right? I mean, if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I think I'm not where I'm supposed to be, obviously, try to get yourself out of that situation, get back to where you're allowed to be. I think that's always smart. Take care that you're not causing any damage, right? If we haven't damaged something, again, I think far less likely to end up in a bad scenario. I think another thing, if a landowner does approach you, I think cooler heads prevail, right? So you don't, and listen, I get it, right? Some random person's on your land and you're coming up and you're probably not happy about it. I think important, everybody stay calm, right? You can explain like, here's what happened. I thought I was here or whatever that story may be, right? But just try to stay calm, don't escalate the situation. I think all of those are kind of useful tips.
And so this kind of also brings up, so if you, say you're like shed hunting or something, again, wildlife person, I think like wildlife, you're shed hunting, I guess arrowhead hunting would probably be another pastime that people like to do where you're actually like picking up stuff. And where would that fall? If you're trespassing on someone's property, find an object that you decide to take with you. I guess it'd be like, I realize it's probably like a really weird question. It just kind of,
yeah, I mean, I would sure think that there could potentially be either trespass damage claims made, or there could even potentially be like a conversion or a theft claim made, again, depending on what it was that you had gathered and if the state wanted to prosecute or whatever. So lots of ifs there, but I do think there's the potential danger for that.
Okay, gotcha. So basically, if you find yourself trespassing, just try to back out slowly. And if you do end up causing damage of some kind, try to contact that landowner and be like, hey, I didn't know I was here. Something happened, something weird. And just,
yeah, in that scenario, if you would cause damage and something like that, it might be worth talking to a lawyer to figure out what the best approach is. I hate to give general advice, right? Like,
right. But
I'm not
it's
sure
true.
General always do X or Y in that scenario, right? Like, I think get some counsel, get some legal advice if you find yourself in that type of situation.
Okay, before reaching out to the landowner, because obviously it's one of those where probably from a legal perspective, it's better to, again, general case scenario is it's going to look a little bit better if you try to contact them versus if they find out later that you did it, it might get you in a little bit more trouble. Maybe that's like the mom and me talking of like, you're supposed to tell the truth at all times.
Yeah. I again, that's where I probably would seek some legal advice, right? Because I just, that probably gets too fact specific to give like once across the board, like here's what you should or shouldn't do answer.
Right. Sure. Gotcha. So from the, you kind of touched a little bit on from the landowner perspective, if you find somebody trespassing on your property, obviously, like you said, cool heads prevail.
Mhm.
So is there anything else from a landowner's perspective that they should keep in mind if they do find a trespasser?
Yeah, I mean, we talked initially about the liability concerns, right? About your actions and intentional acts and gross negligence. I think be aware of that. I also think, if you run into a scenario where it does get heated or the person's not responding favorably or something like that, obviously, calling the authorities is probably a good bet. And maybe that's the best thing to do from the jump, right? In certain situations. But, and I think too, know who to call if that were to happen, right?
Yeah.
Who do you call in your local community? Is it the county sheriff? Is there, if it's a hunting type situation, maybe Parks and Wildlife, game wardens can get involved. I think just know like who to call in that situation, and don't be afraid to get somebody involved, because it may be that you don't need them, right? You may not need the authorities there, but in the event that things were to go south and you needed that sort of support or someone to step in, probably good to have them involved.
Gotcha. Oh, and this kind of again, random question. When it comes to the purple paint, can you do any shade of purple that your
Yeah,
little
there's
heart
no
desires?
yeah, there's no magic number of purple that you have to use, but it has to be purple. There are some states that are different. Some states have like orange paint, purple paint in Texas.
I wonder why purple. Like what? I
There are lots of states that do that. So my guess is some state kind of adopted it, then everybody else just sort of followed suit, if I was
You're
guessing.
like purple. I wonder if there's like a visibility thing, like if purple is like, but you'd think like yellow or like a really bright color would be easier to see versus purple.
I wonder too, like if it matters about people that are colorblind. Like I think yellow is hard for people who are colorblind to see. I don't know,
Oh,
but I wonder if that factors in.
That's what I was thinking.
dive down a weird rabbit hole. I don't even know. I don't even know who the heck you would like ask. You're like, why did they choose the color purple for no
What is the
trespassing?
history of?
Right, right.
Okay. I'm trying to think. I mean, I feel like we've covered Carly. Go ahead. You gotta.
Yeah, so we are talking about trespassing, but also landowner liability. So I guess kind of flipping the script a little bit. What if we're not talking about trespassing and we know that somebody came on our property, we invited them on there, in whatever form or fashion that may look like. Whether that be, I don't know, maybe somebody has an Airbnb, or if it is hunting and that person is, a lease, you say leasee,
Mhm.
or a weekend guest, or what have you. What are like some things that are kind of going off in your mind already? What are some things that people need to know? Like first thing that comes to my mind is a waiver, but what else are you thinking?
Yeah, so great question. We actually do a 2-hour class on this, so clearly I
Okay.
will cover everything in the next 2 minutes. The 2-minute version of that, though, is the duty that you owe, right, or the responsibility you have to people who you're inviting on the property is higher than that of a trespasser. That
Sure.
makes sense, right? So a couple of key things, right? One of them is if you're aware of any hidden dangerous conditions on the property, you need to make sure you warn people about those somehow, or you fix them and make them safe. So I always encourage people, like, think about your property, like what hidden dangerous conditions are there? And if you can think of them, you need to figure out some plan to do that. An old abandoned well is a perfect example. If I own a property and there's some old abandoned well, I need to do something, right? A sign, put it in my hunting lease, put it in my waiver, whatever, just make sure I've made that warning. So that's one thing to do. Second thing that all landowners need to do is make sure they carry liability insurance. This is true even if it's got a trespasser situation and they get injured, but you want to have that liability insurance to protect you and also to help provide a defense to you if you end up in a lawsuit. So that's really important. Liability waivers, recommend those all the time. I think that's a smart thing to have if you're going to have folks coming on your property, particularly for things like hunting or other recreational type activities. And the last thing I would say is there's a handful of statutes here in Texas that protect rural landowners. There's 3 of those you need to look into. And we've got podcast episodes and fact sheets and stuff on them. If you're interested in that, we can help you track them down.
Yeah, let
It's
me
the,
figure it out there.
yeah, it's the Recreational Use Statute, it's the Agritourism Act, and the Farm Animal Liability Act. I would say all rural landowners need to familiarize yourself with those. And to the extent that they could apply to you, I would take the steps to make sure that they do.
So those are statutes that are in place that you really I hate to say you really and truly don't have to do anything other than owning your property to be automatically protected with obviously like weird caveats and
There
whatnot.
are some minor things you have to do, right? Like you may have to hang up a sign, you may have
Okay.
to carry a certain level of insurance, you may have to, but very minor things to get a really important protection.
Gotcha. So, let's jump back to you had mentioned about like dangers on your property, the abandoned well example. So Timmy doesn't fall down and Lassie comes to save him.
Right.
Does that include, say you have livestock or wildlife on your property that could potentially harm? Obviously, animals are going to do what they do. They feel threatened. Rattlesnakes, great example for this, bulls, whatnot. They do what they want. So would you need to give like a warning for something like that?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the answer is no. So generally for like wild animals on the property, things like snakes, wasps, scorpions, ants, stuff like that, generally the landowner is not liable and they don't have to give any sort of warning. Now, just because you legally don't have to, is it still smart to? Maybe, because if we could avoid the injury altogether, that's better, right? But generally not liable. There's a couple of kind of wonky exceptions. If you brought the snake in from somewhere else, you can be liable.
So like you're talking about like like a black mamba or something like
I guess,
crazy
yeah, you
like
go on
that.
vacation and bring home a snake, right? Like, I don't, somebody did this for me to know it's the law. I don't know. Okay.
Of course.
The second thing is if you've reduced that wild animal to your possession. So I guess if you like went out and caught the rattlesnake and kept him in your yard.
Okay.
Again, who does this? I don't know, but you could be liable there. Otherwise, not liable for things like that.
Okay.
As far as animals go, like you were talking about bulls, there's a couple of different things there. One of them is, again, there was a wild case one time about a sheep that hurt somebody, and it was like, oh, they train him to attack. The court basically was like, no, we're not doing this.
No.
So generally not liable. And then also that Texas Farm Animal Liability Act, depending on the activity that was going on at the time, that can be a protection in those type of situations as well.
Gotcha. My mind immediately went to like a mutton busting, like you put a kid on and you're just like, be free. Like, I hope it goes well. But
Right.
Which by the way, mutton busting is like, in my opinion, one of the best
Oh,
like
that's my favorite.
Fabulous.
inventions ever. Like whoever decided to put kids on the back of sheep, genius. Absolutely.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess are there any other like weird little caveats in regards to, I'll say like the danger side of things? I guess you're kind of more so if it's like like you said, like a well, like a man-made structure or
and hidden is a key here.
Hidden.
Right?
Okay.
So, yeah,
okay.
somebody else, if the person can look at it and see the danger just like you can, not as
So
big
like
of
a
an
cliff, like it's like there's a cliff.
Yes.
It's like do not go near the cliff. You don't
That's
need to
right.
stick up a
Yeah.
sign that says danger cliff. But if it's
That's
kind of
right.
like a hidden cliff or something like that,
or like
then
the abandoned well, right? Yes, that's right.
gotcha.
And I'm trying to think from a trespass perspective. This, I guess I'll just mention this briefly, but if you have property that's landlocked in Texas, you can't trespass on your neighbor's property to access yours, right? You have to figure out some way to get access. And so I would encourage people, if you are crossing someone else's property to get to your own, again, this is a separate chat for a separate day. I got a whole lesson on this, but if you're doing that and you don't have the legal right to do it, that's something you need to get cleared up ASAP. Because what can happen is property will start changing hands and we get, 5 owners down the road and the nice neighbor who's letting you cross it now is gone. And now you're landlocked and you can't get to your property, which makes it really hard to sell it when you can't mortgage anything against it. So I would just encourage you, if that's something you have going on, it's kind of tangential to trespass, but I'd sure try to get that cleaned up.
And so you technically have no right to build an easement to your property. Like there is no right to that. It is, you have to speak with somebody and get it basically legalized that yes, we're going to put an easement in. And yes, I do have the legal right to use that easement to get to said property.
Kind of. So yeah, so there's no automatic right where somebody has to give you an easement. That floats around sometimes. People are like, oh, you can't be landlocked. Somebody has to give me an easement. That's not automatic. No, they don't. You may be able to get one from them, right? It's called an express easement. If they'll just agree, a lot of times you pay for it, but if you can get one that way. There may be a way that if you have the right facts, there's like 3 or 4 different ways you can go to court and prove what we call an implied easement, but they're not automatic. You have to be able to prove the right facts for those. So Again, something to really like look at, make sure you have buttoned up and, you know, things right, because that can turn into a real problem down the road.
Which it's crazy to me that I hate to say you don't have the right to get to your own property, but I mean it's true because then you're trespassing on someone else's property. So it kind of gets like it's a weird like muddy water situation where you just get into the weeds. So it's just
Yeah,
kind of
that's right.
weird.
Yeah, right. I mean, and you know, I think both people are trying to exercise their property rights, and it gets complicated when one person's ability to do that kind of steps on the other, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But like
not to get into the weeds of it, but is that something like, say you're a new or wanting to purchase land, is that something that you should kind of figure out like at the time
Oh,
of purchasing?
absolutely.
Yeah.
High on my list. We're actually working on a checklist right now for people
Mhm.
looking to buy rural property. So stay tuned for that in 2026. But
Cool.
high on the list is you've got to make sure that there's legal access. And like I say, this comes up because if there's not, you can't get title insurance.
Yeah.
And if you need a loan to buy the property and you can't get title insurance, you can't get a loan. So a lot of times it'll come up in that process, but it's absolutely something folks should be looking for. Like, is there legal access? They need to make sure that that's the case.
is it and I don't know if you can answer this. Do realtors legally have to tell you if you have legal access to your property? Do you know?
So I think I shouldn't say this for sure. There are disclosures that have to be made, right? If people are aware of issues. So I'm guessing, but I would guess that that probably is something that you would have to disclose. Where it comes up though is when there's a title search that's done. Again, if you're paying cash, may not come up, but if you're going to be getting title insurance with the purchase, it should come up in that title policy. And a lot of times it'll come back as an exception to the title. And then that's where a lot of times a lender will step in and say, wait, we can't make this loan. And it can come up then. So like I say, from a landowner perspective, whether you own land now that someday may need to be sold, or whether you're looking to buy land, ensuring that legal access is in place, super important.
So if you're purchasing with cash, you really need to be extra careful. Obviously with the title, you know, if you have a title, you'll kind of come up with it before you ever put any skin in the game. But with cash, you really got to be
Yeah, I mean,
careful.
I always
Either
recommend
way.
people. I always recommend people get title insurance and do a title search, whether you're going to pay with cash or with a loan. If you do that, that should catch the issue. If you're going to pay with cash and you're not going to get title insurance, man, I would do some research of my own to make sure I had that legal access. And we see this popping up more and more in y'all's part of the world because we're seeing so many larger parcels get split into pieces.
Yes.
And if those easements aren't done and recorded correctly, it can really become problematic.
So who would have that information as to whether or not there is a legal easement onto the property? Your county appraisal district?
It should be recorded in the deed records at the courthouse. In a perfect
records.
world, when it's done correctly, that's where you'll
Right.
find it, right? There should be an easement document recorded in the courthouse, or it could be in a deed. The easement can be granted in a deed, but there's got to be something recorded in that courthouse. If you've just got a handshake agreement with your neighbor and all of a sudden your neighbor doesn't own that land anymore, that handshake agreement doesn't help you. Got to have something recorded in those deed records.
Okay, gotcha. I feel like that's like, is there anything that we're kind of missing? I feel like we've covered that's pretty well. Like, Frey, as you said, you have multiple different courses that you take a deep, like 2-hour dive into some of these topics,
Right.
but as like a very cursory, like, you know, sort of 1,000-foot view of the topic, trespassing and liability. I feel like that is a very
Yeah.
pretty good coverage of it. But I mean, if y'all have questions, I know Tiffany would be more than happy to answer your questions.
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
go
Glad
ahead.
to chat with folks. The other thing is we've got some resources available online. Our Owning Your Piece of Texas handbook is great, and it covers all of these different issues in one place. We do a course called Owning Your Piece of Texas. That's an online course that's available on demand 24/7. We also do in-person courses that we'll be doing some of those in 2026 as well. So lots of resources available.
Yes.
And then also I'm glad to chat with anybody who has specific questions as well.
And I have a question with those in-person classes. I know you're located up in the Panhandle. Do you kind of travel across the state for those, or is they mostly?
I do. The in-person classes, we've traveled all over the state. We've done them everywhere. We did a big one in Fredericksburg one time. This in 2026, I will tell you, we're only doing one, and it's going to be in Caldwell in November. So
So
But
y'all
like I
have
said, we've got
time
that.
to plan.
We have time. Yeah, but we've got that on-demand course that you can do online anytime. So that's available if that doesn't work for somebody.
Okay. Is there like a benefit to doing online versus in person? I mean, obviously some people learn better in person versus virtual, but
That's what I was gonna say. I think it's probably your preference. I always prefer in person. I think that you get the interaction with folks, you get to hear their questions, you get to hear comments at the breaks. One place that the online course is better, I think there's, well, actually a couple of things. One of them is you can go at your own pace, right?
Mhm.
So when you sit down in my course, we're rocking and rolling for 8 hours, right? And then it's over. If you want to go slower, if you want to go back and listen to something, the online course lets you do that. The other thing the online course does is it lets us cover more material. And so we teach on more topics in the online course than we're able to at an in-person class.
yeah, because yeah, in person, yeah, you get that interaction, you get good conversation going. But yeah, online is there's benefits to both.
There's
So
benefits to both. Yeah.
yeah. But all right, well, Carly, do you have any other final thoughts or questions?
I did link your blog website on
Perfect.
in the comment here. So if you're watching and you were like, oh, I really want to take one of those courses, it's in there in her website. She has a podcast too that I actually listen to and really enjoy it. So if you
Awesome.
want to
Good.
hear more of her, actually I went to the one in Fredericksburg and I had asked you about one specifically, and I sent that to a friend of mine. So
Good.
yeah, it's very, very good. So if you're interested in that, take a listen. It's really good. But other than that, do y'all have anything else?
I mean, I think you're good. What's the name of your podcast? How often do you
Oh yeah,
post?
sorry.
Yeah, sure. So the podcast is called Ag Law in the Fields. We're on all your podcast apps. Historically, we've done 2 a month. I'm going to slow down a little bit in 26, and we're going to do 1 episode a month. But we've done 212 episodes so far. So we've been going for a while,
Been
10
going.
years. Lots of content there.
Oh,
And then my blog that Carly linked to is called the Texas Agriculture Law Blog. And that's just kind of the landing page for all the content I create. And everything I do is available there for free. We have things you can pay for, but almost everything you can get for free on that website.
Awesome. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. Hope everyone has an absolutely fantastic Christmas and holiday season. But yeah, we'll see y'all in January of 2026. So bye, everybody.
bye. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.